I really thank everybody for giving me the opportunity. Warren had asked me a while back if I'd be interested in sharing what my experience has been about in my life. Um, it's been a journey. Many that hear my story from time when I share it, whether it's in prisons, I go into prisons and share my story. Youth camps, I've gone to youth camps, I share it with them, blows their minds away. And my church, or high school, I go to high schools at times to share it with the kids in there. Many compare my story to the story of the prodigal son, and I can see the correlations of what I went through as a young kid. And but right now, at times, I feel like Job, the blessings that I've received here in the past decade, one can say. But the only difference between Job and I is he was faithful and I wasn't. The grace and mercy that the Lord has shown me, and I'm sure many of us feel that we don't deserve it. And I really feel like that. I mean, sincerely feel like that at times. I've heard Anthony's story, I've read his book, and I know he feels like that at times. And that's just, that's our hearts. We got good hearts, gentlemen. My life has been about planting seeds, and I'm going to kind of talk about two seeds that were planted. One early in my life, and one in the midst of a bad environment. And it all leads me to right here. Endure Bible study. I want to put the timer on because, well, not the timer, just the stopwatch, so I know I'm keeping track of time. Warren said, hey, try to keep it at 20 minutes. When I told my wife I'd be sharing my story, she said, oh my Lord, do these people got to go to work? And I'm like, no, I'm going to keep it under control. I want to start by reading a passage of scripture that I used to meditate on when I hit my rock bottom, and it's Philippians 4:11 through 13. And I'm sure many of y'all have heard the scripture. It says, "Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." I was born in Dallas, Texas, 1977. I was raised in Richardson, Texas. It's a suburb of North Dallas area. My parents weren't the best, but they did what they could. I love my parents. My dad's not with us anymore. My mother is. They weren't really church going. My mom had a heavy hand on us growing up, and she was the one that kind of forced us to go to church. Prestonwood Baptist Church was my first church, and I remember it was at Hillcrest. It was a huge church to me, but if you look at it now, it's even bigger. That's where I grew in my relationship with Jesus. I was about 8 years old, and I started growing, learning songs as a kid, and I loved it. I was around good kids at that church, and I remember giving my life to Christ, and it was the most peaceful, loving experience of my life as an 8-year-old. A wonderful time for me. And my little brother, we both grew up in the same manner. I remember coming home, wanted to read the whole Bible. At 8 or 9 years old, that's not real normal, but that was like a goal that I had. I don't remember what book I got to in the Bible where it started talking about law, and I got lost right there. I didn't want to continue. But a seed was planted, gentlemen. A seed was planted then. My life, I felt, was perfect at that time. My parents, I was going to church, they were together. And then, the D word hit our life. Divorce. And I didn't know what was happening. You know, if you've experienced it at a young age, kids sometimes don't know what's going on in that situation. You know, their mom and dad, to them, they're perfect. You know, and to me, that was the experience I was having at that point. And I remember being in the room, listening to my parents fight as I held my baby brother and telling him, hey, you know, go to sleep, calm down, you're all right. And he was crying. We're both crying, not understanding what's going on. I remember praying to Jesus. But the split up came anyways. And I didn't understand what was happening. Eventually, the split up occurred. And I started realizing, man, my family wasn't perfect after all. I entered into middle school in the Richardson district and started meeting a whole new world. Girls, you know, I was probably 11, 12 years old, heading into 13, hanging out with the wrong crowd now, a different group of friends. I went from playing sports to doing pretty good in school to going to church and slowly pulling away from God now. I wasn't going to Prestonwood Baptist Church anymore. I wasn't going to church at all anymore. And then I met something that really turned my life upside down, that some of us can relate to, drugs. And it grabbed a hold of me, and it turned my life upside down. You know, as I was doing all this, it's kind of funny, but I knew I was wrong on what I was doing, and that was the Spirit talking to me. It was still in there. There was still a little bit of light of what I experienced as an 8-year-old when I gave my life to Jesus Christ. But as I continued into the path of what I wanted to start doing now, the thug life, the drugs, gang banging, because in the 90s, gang banging was pretty big, and that's what I wanted to start doing. I thought it was cool because society was glamorizing that in those times. I'm just going to fast forward. October 15th, 1994, I landed in the Dallas County Jail at the age of 17. I didn't really know what I had gotten myself into, but it wasn't anything pretty. It, you know, back up a little bit, I had a son at the age of 16 before I landed in Dallas County Jail. I wanted to be a dad to my son. I wanted to be a good father because I knew that was the right thing to do. But the drugs had a hold of me, and that lifestyle still had a hold of me. My son was 1 year old when I landed in Dallas County Jail. I was sentenced on May of 1995 to 6 40-year sentences. 40 years sentences, 6 of them. I had committed 6 armed robberies while I was on those drugs. Not an excuse, not a justification. You can't use an excuse. Trust me, the judge wasn't trying to hear it. But they made an example out of me. And he was going to try to make sure I didn't come back out. I went in, I remember when they gave me the sentence, I remember hearing my mother cry. You know, and the movies don't show you the hurt that you cause to the ones that you love with the actions that you do while you're doing them and enjoying the things you think you're enjoying, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever it is, the materialistic, the money. You're chasing something. A lot of us chase that. And I was chasing it. And it landed me to the spot I was now. But I never thought that I would experience the pain that I felt when my mother broke down behind me in the courtroom, sobbing. All I wanted to do was go hug her and tell her, Mom, everything's going to be all right. I remember the bailiffs and the bailiffs grabbed me by the arms and took me straight to the back. I remember hearing the bailiffs clearly that, man, this kid's life just got thrown away. I don't even think he knows it. Look at him. I was zoned out. But I knew what was happening. Instantly, rage started filling my heart. They took me back to my cell in Lucerne. I paced up and down. They usually will lock. At that time, they used to lock our doors. If you got a pretty big sentence, they would lock your door. You wouldn't come out into the regular day rooms because they didn't know if you were going to be a stick of dynamite and blow up on somebody. Rage started filling inside of me. I saw the Bible that I had been reading up to the point that I got sentenced on my pillow. I picked it up and I chunked it on the wall and I cursed God with everything I could curse, telling him, stay out of my life. I don't want you in my life. I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. Gentlemen, I went into the men's penitentiary like a raging bull, an anorexic raging bull, because I weighed 130 pounds at the age of 18 going into the penitentiary. But I promised myself, riding that bus to Huntsville, that I wasn't going to let anybody hurt me without a fight. The prison system in the 90s was gang infested and filled with sexual predators back then. It's not like anything like it is now. But I went in with rage. It was a roller coaster for me the first 4 years of my sentence. Constant fighting, trying to make a name for myself. Don't mess with Niko in here. That's what I wanted people to know. And I hated God still. And it was obvious. If you knew me then, you would never have wanted me out here ever again. That's how lost I was, gentlemen. And sometimes, you know, it's crazy. Somebody that had given their life to Christ at the age of 8 to be where I was becoming at that point in my life. It was November of 1998 that things really took for a spin for me. I had already made a name for myself. The gangs were targeting me. I had gotten to the point where one of the biggest gangs in Texas, for the Hispanic gangs, and they were known for stabbing, put a hit out on me because I chose not to go join their gang. They gave me an ultimatum. Join them and represent with them, or I pay for protection and do favors for them. I'm sure you can imagine the favors that they would want. And I told them I would think about it. But I had already made up my mind. I went to my cell, and if you've heard of the saying of a kamikaze, that's what I chose to do. I got a shank, and I took it to the first one that I saw on the run. I tried to take a man's life at that point in my life because they were still trying to hurt me. And I was still doing things my way. I didn't want God in my life. It was at that point they threw me into solitary confinement. And they told me I would be there for 2 years of my life because I tried to kill and take another man's life. I was 21 years old at that point, and man, what a way to celebrate, right? At 21. I remember sitting in the cell, and an officer had just came and read me my Miranda rights for the second time in my life. Yes, they can give you more time when you're in prison. I had just did an attempted murder, so of course that would be one of the consequences, another charge and another sentence on top of your sentence that I already had. It was at that point that I felt my life was over with. I wasn't going home. And I remember sitting there, and I was just looking at my day. All I had was a bunk, a metal bunk, no pillow, no sheets, nothing. And there was an old beat up book sitting on the table in the cell. I looked at my boxers, they were still stained with gas, pepper gas and blood from the fight that I had just had. And I was leading on my own understanding I was never going home, gentlemen. And one of the verses that we know, Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. I picked up the book, which that was the only thing that was in my cell at that time. And it was this book right here. The same exact book. It was beat up then. I've already had it revamped. Made it look nice again. And I thought about my days as a kid. I've never felt that alone in my life. And I opened the book and I started praying. I got on my knees. And I just said, God, man, help me, man. Help me. And I remember, I closed my eyes, I started praying, and I remember God I remember feeling like He was telling me, man, I got you. Just give me that opportunity and I got you. You know, the remaining 14 years from there up to my release, I'm not going to say it was perfect. It was still rock and roll. It was still prison. I eventually got released from solitary confinement. And Niko made a name for himself. Everybody had heard of Niko by now. I got out. Nobody wanted to be around me, but they didn't know that I had renewed my relationship with God in those 2 years. Those 2 years was the closest relationship I've ever had with God in my life, with Jesus Christ. And He started chiseling on me, gentlemen. He started chiseling on me like He never had before. It was my 7th, 8th year of being in prison that I was sitting in a day room. And I was watching the TV. And it was a documentary being shown. And gentlemen, y'all probably have heard of Dick and Rick Hoyt of the Iron Man. The father that carried his handicap, he was a handicapped son that couldn't do anything, and he carried him. And I felt I was in awe with this documentary that I was watching. It was symbolizing to me that what God had done for me for those 2 years in that prison cell. He carried me through something that, man, I was helpless. I didn't know how I was going to live in that cell for 2 years of my life by myself. But I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. I felt loved in that cell with this Bible as I read His Word. September 17th, of 2015, I got released after serving 21 years of my life in prison. I had made myself a promise watching that documentary that one day I would do an Iron Man. People used to mock me about it, saying, you're never even going home. You're going to try to kill somebody in this penitentiary, Niko. You think they're going to let you go? Doubt would seep in. I'm not going to say, because the reality was, they're not going to. They're probably never going to let me out. But I made parole. My first parole, I made it. And people don't make their first parole many times in prison. They'll see them 5, 6 times, just like the Shawshank Redemption. I made my first parole. I don't know how, but I made it. Gentlemen, when I came home, September the 17th of 2015, I was lost. Didn't know how to use a cell phone. Was scared. Didn't know how to use a debit card. I didn't know how to be around a woman. Asked my wife. She was my first co-worker, and I was terrified of her. Because I just didn't feel comfortable being around a woman. Not for any bad reasons. It's just, in there, you're not even supposed to be close to a female. Or you can get thrown in jail and lockup for it. Nine years went by. I got married, had a little daughter that many of y'all have met. The loudest, sweetest little thing you'll ever meet. I mean, I've been blessed tremendously, gentlemen, since I've been out. I've been out 11 years already. But 9 years up to the point, I never thought about the Iron Man. And then I was giving my testimony to a high school seniors at a football, Louisville High School seniors, telling my testimony. And I was talking to them about goals after I gave my story, my testimony to them, and talking to them about promises. It was then that I remembered my promise about the Iron Man that I had made myself while I was in prison. And I didn't even think about it. Well, on the way home from giving my testimony, I started thinking about that. I said, well, man, I'm going to do an Iron Man. I got home, told my wife about it. My wife's like, sure, do whatever you want to do. She didn't know what exactly an Iron Man was. When she found out, she was like, are you crazy? She's like, you don't even know how to swim. I got on the website, and we found Frisco Triathlon Club. You know, I'm going to spare you the details on my first days of joining the Frisco Triathlon Club. I showed up, seen a bunch of older guys. I was into CrossFit at the time. I was like, oh my God, these are all, I want to dust these guys. It was torture for me. It was a humbling experience, but I stuck with it. 10 months later, I crossed the finish line.
Yes.
And that, you know, ironically, it took 21 years. I was actually doing the math. 21 years from the day I did my promise to when I crossed the finish line for me to do an Ironman. December 20th of 2025, I had just crossed the finish line of my marathon. When my wife, as soon as I crossed the finish line, my wife gave me the news. Up to that point, back up a little bit, Daryl and Jason had invited me to this men's Bible study throughout the year of my training. And I had told them, sure, yeah, I'm interested, but I never came. I ignored the call. When we lost our two brothers that I was very fortunate to meet, very blessed to meet, they invited me again, and this time I came. Up to this point, I hadn't told anybody about my story, and I sat right here. And I just, man, it was hard, but I had to I just felt like opening up right then. Had nothing to do with what happened to our brothers in regards at that point, but nobody knew my story up to that point. But I felt like opening up because I felt like the men in here would understand, and I didn't even know y'all. But it was just, I just felt, and it's just ironic after all this that it's led me to come to this Bible study, this group of men, the story you just gave, your story. And gentlemen, in all my journey, I've been blessed tremendously. And my bonus son, my stepson, he told me once, he said, you know, Nick, I'm glad you went to prison. And I was just like, he said, because if you didn't, I would have never have met you. And you would have never have met my mom. I've gone through a lot since I've been out, but I try to serve. Because that's what God asks us to do. Gentlemen, you don't have to be inside of a prison with walls and razor wire and guard tires to be in a prison. I know we all know somebody going through hard times, and sometimes we just want to stay away from them because of the way that they're acting or the way they look. I would encourage y'all to reach out. Say something kind or loving, or invite them here. I was invited over and over by Daryl and Jason. And now I can't stop coming. I thank all of you for being my iron. As Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron, gentlemen. And I thank y'all. And this has been a tremendous blessing being able to come here and be a part of you guys. And what we're doing is sharpening each other. Thank y'all for your time.